Training is key for any soldier. One saying which reflects the importance of training is train hard, fight easy. During the Second World War, this was no less true, with some units, such as those belonging to the Canadian 2nd Division, which arrived in Britain in August 1940, undergoing training through 1941 before finally seeing action against German forces during the ill-fated raid on Dieppe in August 1942. As the war progressed, Allied plans began to turn towards the invasion of Northwest Europe. In preparation for the invasion, British, American, Canadian, Polish and Free French forces underwent training. In order to train this vast force, training areas were necessary. Some training areas, such as Bovington Camp in Dorset, England, already existed, having been established in 1899. New training facilities were, however, necessary. In 1942, the British Army established the Stanford Training Area in Norfolk near Thetford. Military exercises were known in the Thetford area, with tanks having been deployed to Thetford during the First World War. In order to establish the Stanford Training Area, the villages of Buckingham Tofts, Langford, Stanford, West Tofts, Tottington and Sturston were evacuated, the properties in each village being taken over by the military following compulsory purchase. Though some villagers were said to be happy to give up their homes to help the British war effort, the majority were less than enthusiastic, with a number of heated village meetings and some refusing to leave the area. Under military control, the villages were used for live firing exercises and for training in tactics to be used during street fighting. However, at the end of the war, the former villagers were never allowed to return to their homes by the War Office. Most of the inhabitants of Tottington and the other villages rented their houses and farmed the land belonging to the Walsingham estates. Though they were promised that they could return to their homes after the war, the British government went back on this promise and bought the land, threatening Walsingham with a compulsory purchase order. As the majority of the inhabitants were not landowners, they received very little in compensation, the majority being put into council housing, with many more losing their livelihoods. They continued to fight for many years to return to their homes and farmland, but the beginning of the Cold War and the need for dedicated training areas removed all chances of a return. Since the evacuation, the villages and parishes remain within the Ministry of Defence's Stanford Training Area. Access is not permitted without special permission. Reminders of the communities that once existed in the villages are the 4 churches which remain. The parish church of St Andrews in Tottington is situated at the northern end of the village. The roof of the church is clad in blast-proof sheeting, which was installed to protect the structure of the church. The original pantiles are stored inside the church, ready to be restored if the village is ever given back to the public. The churchyard itself is surrounded by wire fencing to protect the church from military manoeuvres. In October 2009, William Hancock, a Second World War veteran who had died at the age of 85, who had been born in the village, was buried in St Andrew's churchyard after permission for the interment was granted by the Ministry of Defence. It was the first burial in the churchyard for more than 50 years. The other churches within the Stanford Training Area are the Parish Church of All Saints in Stanford, the Parish Church of St Andrews in Langford, and St Mary's Church in West Tofts. Since the Second World War, the Stanford Training Area has continued to be used for military training exercises. In 2009, a 12.5-acre village, designed to replicate an Afghan village, was added to the battle area for the training of troops deployed in support of the war in Afghanistan. The site, built at a cost of £14 million, was state-of-the-art and populated by Afghan nationals, ex-Gurkha soldiers, and amputee actors who simulated members of the Afghan National Army, locals and wounded soldiers. The village included houses, a market and a mosque, and also featured a system which pumped out smells of rotten meat and sewage. As a live firing area, access is not allowed without special permission from the Ministry of Defence. In the main, this is limited to a number of tours each year and compassionate grounds for former residents of the village or their relatives. It may, however, be noted that part of the battle area was used in the filming of some scenes of the comedy series Dad's Army. The Stanford Training Area forms part of the distinctive Brackland landscape region a gorse-covered sandy heath which offers poor agricultural opportunities. Arguably, its use as a military training area has safeguarded a substantial archaeological landscape. Like many other military or restricted areas in the UK, such as Bovington Camp and MOD areas on Salisbury Plain, it is the home of a wealth of rare species of flora and fauna already lost in other parts of the country, parts of the training area being designated as a site of special scientific interest. The villages within the Stanford training area are not, however, the only villages in England that were lost to the war effort. Villagers living in Imber on Salisbury Plain were cleared from the village in 1943 to allow the military to use the village and surrounding area as training grounds. Imber would be used by American troops for training during preparations for the invasion of Europe. The majority of the 152 villagers left Imber without any resistance. Residents of one farm did, however, have to be forcibly evicted by the army. Albert Nash, who by 1943 had been a blacksmith in the village for 40 years, was reportedly found sobbing over his anvil when the army evicted him. Following the war, the residents attempted to return, but the village remained under the control of the Ministry of Defence. Since 2009, annual summer openings of the village have been common. Tyneham is a village in Dorset which lies between the two ridges of the Purbeck Hills. In the autumn of 1943, the residents of Tyneham received a letter from the government giving them 1 month's notice to vacate their homes, whereupon it was used as a training area. Following the war, the villagers were not permitted to return, the area continuing to be administered by the Ministry of Defence. A village where time stopped, Tyneham can be visited by the public on weekends and on public holidays.
Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more updates, like and share. You can also help to support the channel at Patreon. Details are in the description box below.